This week's SMB Risk Signals, SharePoint Trust, Renewal Law, and AI Presence. The workflows that can act for you now need clearer consent, containment, and approval. This is the SMB Tech and Cybersecurity Leadership Newsletter. On July 16, 2026, CISA updated its SharePoint exploitation alert after adding a new SharePoint vulnerability to the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog. The agency warned that active exploitation of multiple on-premises SharePoint flaws can lead to remote code execution, stolen IIS, machine keys, persistence, and malware deployment. On July 22, 2026, New York Attorney General Letitia James secured a $375,000 settlement from 1-800-Flowers after investigators found deceptive automatic subscription renewals, inadequate acknowledgments, and missing renewal notice controls. Also on July 22, 2026, OpenAI introduced Presence, a product for deploying enterprise AI agents with policies, guardrails, approved actions, and human escalation rules. These are not three unrelated headlines. They are one operating problem. The workflows that can execute for you, charge for you, or act for you now need clearer consent, containment, and approval boundaries. If a collaboration server can quietly become an execution surface, if a renewal engine can bill customers without clear notice, or if an AI agent can touch systems before your policies are mature, trust is still outrunning control. Section 1. SharePoint trust breaks fast when old collaboration servers stay exposed. The SharePoint story matters because it is not about a fringe system. It is about a platform many organizations still treat as a quiet, internal utility, even though it can hold documents, workflows, service accounts, and administrative leverage. CISA said active exploitation affects all supported on-premises SharePoint server versions, Subscription Edition 2019 and 2016. Here is why you should be concerned. First, this is already active exploitation. CISA said threat actors are exploiting for SharePoint vulnerabilities, not merely scanning for them. Second, post-exploitation risk is broader than patching. The alert says the activity includes stealing IIS machine keys and using deserialization techniques to gain persistence and deploy malware. Third, the hardening advice is specific. CISA urged organizations to apply patches, enable AMSI with full mode where feasible, hunt for intrusion artifacts before rotating machine keys, and avoid exposing SharePoint directly to the internet unless it sits behind an authenticated Layer 7 reverse proxy. The strategic action is to treat on-premises collaboration servers as privileged execution surfaces. If your team cannot say whether any SharePoint server is still externally reachable, whether AMSI is fully enabled, or who owns the service account and machine key response plan, your containment story is still incomplete. This week's leadership move is simple. First, confirm whether any supported SharePoint server instance is still running on premises and whether it is exposed directly or indirectly to the internet. Second, verify that Microsoft's latest security updates installed cleanly and that AMSI integration is enabled for each SharePoint web application. Third, hunt for web shells, suspicious worker process activity, and machine key access before rotating secrets or restarting services. Section 2. Auto-renewal compliance is now an operating control problem. The 1-800-Flowers settlement is useful because it turns recurring billing into a concrete legal and process control issue for every SMB that sells subscriptions, retainers, support plans, training, or membership-style services. New York's Attorney General said the company failed to clearly disclose subscription terms, failed to provide the acknowledgment required by New York law, and did not notify subscribers before the subscription renewed automatically. Here is why you should be concerned. The control failures were basic, not exotic. The public settlement says terms were buried in fine print, linked terms, or pop-out boxes many consumers never opened. Consent and proof both mattered. New York law requires affirmative consent, a post-purchase acknowledgement, and an easy cancellation process, not just a checkout page that technically mentions renewal somewhere, and recurring revenue can become recurring legal risk. If your team cannot prove who approved the wording, who owns the acknowledgement email or screen, and who validates reminder notice behavior, the renewal engine is acting on trust alone. The strategic action is to treat recurring billing workflows like compliance controls, not just growth mechanics. The standard is no longer whether the checkout flow converts. It is whether you can clearly show consent, acknowledgement, reminder, and cancellation evidence when a complaint or regulator asks. I know lean SMB teams often inherit billing plugins, software plan logic, and lifecycle emails from several different owners. That is exactly why this issue matters. If no one owns the legal behavior of the renewal flow end to end, the business can keep charging long after the control story has broken. This week's leadership move: review every auto-renewing offer and confirm the renewal term, cancellation policy, and renewal behavior appear clearly before payment. Test whether the customer receives a usable post-purchase acknowledgement and a renewal reminder when the law or policy requires one. Then, save one evidence packet this week: the checkout screen, the acknowledgement, the reminder, and the cancellation path for a live recurring product. Section 3. Presence makes agent governance an immediate design choice. OpenAI's Presence launch matters because it reframes enterprise agents as policy-bound operating systems, not just better chatbots. OpenAI says the challenge is no longer proving that agents can work. It is making them reliable enough to do high-value work in production without giving up control. Here is why you should be concerned. First, the product model starts with a specific job: OpenAI says each deployment begins with a bounded workflow such as billing, claims, or internal IT support, and the agent receives only the knowledge and system access required for that job. Second, policies are part of the product, not an afterthought. Presence brings together policies, standard operating procedures, guardrails, approved actions, simulations, evaluation tools, and a codex-powered improvement process. Third, escalation is a first-class design decision. The company sets what the agent can do, when it needs approval, and when a person should take over. The strategic action is to define the allowed context, the approved actions, the escalation triggers, and the acceptable failure mode before your team expands any agent pilot. If your only governance plan is to review outputs, you do not yet have a production boundary. This week's leadership move: pick one workflow where an AI system can draft or retrieve, but cannot finalize action without named human approval. Document what systems the workflow can access, what data it can touch, and what event forces escalation to a person. Then measure cost per accepted outcome and escalation rate, not just token spend or total conversations. Final thoughts for leaders: SharePoint hardening, renewal law compliance, and AI presence all point to the same leadership question: which trusted workflows in your business can act before anyone verifies the boundary? The question is not whether the tools are useful. The question is whether you can name the consent owner, the containment owner, and the approval owner before the next failure becomes a customer, legal, or security issue. Put one item on next week's agenda. List the systems that can execute, charge, or escalate on the company's behalf, and assign a named owner for consent, containment, and approval to each one. Subscribe to access the premium implementation guidance, the control register, the checklist, the tabletop exercise, and the full strategy.